In the warmth of the early morning, the house stood as it always had, quiet, orderly, almost perfect. Anna moved through the kitchen with a practiced ease, the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. Her movements were sharp, precise, almost too perfect. Her husband, Greg, sat at the kitchen table, his gaze distant as he scanned a letter. The silence between them was thick, almost suffocating. He hadn't spoken a word in what seemed like hours, his eyes tracing the words of the letter with a blank expression, almost as if he hadn't even noticed her. The tension was palpable. Anna placed his coffee in front of him, her hands trembling slightly. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady but with an edge of impatience. Greg didn't respond immediately, his eyes still fixed on the letter. She waited, her breath shallow, the air thick with unspoken words. She had been waiting for this moment for weeks, ever since she had first put the papers in front of him. The deed to the house. The house that had once been a symbol of their love and shared future. Now, it was nothing but a battleground. As he finally looked up, his eyes met hers, but there was no recognition, no emotion, only cold indifference. She pressed, her voice a little sharper this time. "I need you to sign these, Greg. It's over." Her words felt final, and she couldn't tell if the weight of them was crushing her or him. His lips parted, but no words came. The clock ticked on, as if mocking her, as the finality of her request settled between them, like an anchor pulling them both down. The silence was unbearable, stretching long between them as he finally spoke. "What do you want me to say?" His voice was low, barely audible, as if he were unsure of how to even begin this conversation. Anna didn't flinch. She was prepared for this, for his deflection, for his reluctance. She had expected him to be cold, to be distant, but the emptiness in his voice stung all the same. "I want you to sign these papers, Greg. I want you to leave." The words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. Her hands were steady, but her heart was in turmoil. This wasn't what she had imagined when they first built this life together. She had once hoped for love, for compromise, for a partnership, but now all she felt was the weight of betrayal. Greg's face remained unreadable, his eyes still holding that distant, glassy expression. The coffee in his hand was long gone, forgotten. Slowly, he set the empty cup down, his fingers brushing the surface of the table. His gaze flickered briefly to the papers, then back to her, before he let out a deep sigh. "This isn't you," he muttered, his voice thick with frustration. She could hear the pain beneath his words, but she couldn't afford to let that change her resolve. "You haven't been the person I married either," she replied, the edge in her tone sharper now, like a blade she couldn't put down. Greg's lips parted in disbelief, and he shot up from the chair scraping across the floor with a harsh sound. "So, what now? You want me gone, just like that? After everything?" His words were a mix of anger and hurt, but Anna stood her ground, her face hardening. "Yes, Greg, it's over." The cold finality in her voice stung, but it was necessary. There was no turning back now. She couldn't let herself falter. He didn't respond, his chest rising and falling in quick breaths, as if he were struggling to breathe. She watched him, feeling a pang of something she couldn't quite define. Guilt, sadness, regret. But it wasn't enough to stop her. She had to do this for herself, even if it meant destroying everything. As he turned away, she felt the last shred of their marriage slip away. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't move. She stayed rooted to the spot, silently watching the man she had once loved walk out of her life forever. Greg stormed out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. He didn't know where he was going, only that he needed space to think, to breathe. The papers, the signed papers, kept echoing in his mind. He couldn't understand what had happened to them, what had gone so terribly wrong. They had been so in love once. The days of laughter, of quiet talks, of shared dreams seemed like a distant memory now. He stepped outside into the cool morning air, the sky still holding on to a soft pale blue. He leaned against the fence, his hands resting on the wood, his eyes closed for a moment as he tried to steady himself. "How did we get here?" he whispered, the question lingering in the quiet morning. His thoughts turned back to her, to Anna. Had he really been so blind? The things she had said, the coldness in her eyes, it was like she had become someone else entirely. Maybe he hadn't been the perfect husband, but he never thought it would come to this. I never saw this coming, he muttered bitterly. He remembered the first time they had met. The spark, the connection, the hope for a future. Now, all that was left was a painful void. The wind tugged at his shirt as he stood, his heart heavy with the realization that his marriage was over. And yet, the pain of it all felt like a hollow ache, something he couldn't escape, no matter how far he ran. His mind drifted back to the papers she had placed in front of him. The deed to the house. He had signed them, unsure of what else to do. Was it submission? Was it his last act of defiance? He didn't know, but he knew one thing. For sure, there was no going back. Later that afternoon, Greg found himself pacing the living room, unable to shake the feeling of dread that had settled over him. The house was too quiet now, empty in a way that felt suffocating. He glanced at the clock, the ticking sound growing louder in the silence. Every movement seemed to echo in the space, every breath, every step. His mind was still reeling, still trying to make sense of it all. He needed answers, needed closure, but how could he get that when Anna refused to speak to him? His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. His heart skipped a beat, his pulse quickening as he turned, hoping for something, anything that might bring clarity. But it was only Anna, coming back from wherever she had been. She didn't look at him as she passed through the hallway. She didn't say a word. She simply walked by, her footsteps soft against the floor. Greg opened his mouth, about to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. What could he possibly say? He felt powerless, helpless, trapped in his own home. Anna stopped for a moment, her hand on the doorframe as she glanced back at him, her face unreadable. "You're still here," she said, almost as if surprised by the fact that he hadn't left yet. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. "I'm not going anywhere." His voice was firm, but even to his own ears, it sounded weak, uncertain. Anna didn't respond. She simply turned and walked away, disappearing into the other room. Greg stood there for a moment, his heart pounding in his chest. "What the hell am I supposed to do now?" he thought to himself, his mind a whirlwind of questions with no answers. As the evening approached, the house felt colder, more distant. Greg sat on the couch, his head in his hands, his thoughts a jumbled mess of frustration and confusion. His phone sat beside him, its screen dark. He had considered calling her, begging her to talk, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. Anna had made her decision, and there was nothing left to say. His mind returned to the house again, the house that once felt like a home, filled with laughter, warmth, and love. Now, it felt like a prison. The silence was suffocating. He stood and walked over to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. His fingers traced the edge of the glass as if trying to find some sort of connection, something to hold on to. Outside, the lights from the street lamps flickered faintly, but inside, everything seemed to be fading away. "What now?" he whispered to the empty room. He wasn't ready to give up, not yet. But what could he do when Anna had already decided it was over? "I won't go down without a fight," he muttered under his breath. The fight, whatever it was, had already begun. The morning after their confrontation, the house was eerily quiet. Anna stood in front of the mirror, her reflection staring back at her with an intensity she hadn't seen before. She had made a decision, but as the silence pressed in, doubt crept in. She had ordered Greg out, and now, as the reality of her actions set in, she wasn't sure she felt as confident as before. She had spent weeks planning, convincing herself that this was what was best for her, but the heaviness in her chest told another story. The house that once felt like a safe haven now seemed cold, distant, and empty. She looked down at the signed papers on the counter. Her heart quickened as her mind raced. "What have I done?" she thought. But the sense of control she had felt the night before began to resurface. She had wanted this. She had to. She knew that. But Greg's presence, his absence now, left a void she wasn't prepared for. She had won, yet she felt strangely hollow. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from a friend. "You okay?" it read. She thought about replying, but the words stuck in her throat. How could she explain? She had asked him to leave, and now she was trapped in a house that had once been filled with laughter, love, and warmth. Now, the walls felt like they were closing in. Phone buzzed again. Another message. This time from Greg. "I'm still here." His words sent a shiver down her spine. His presence, his refusal to leave, was starting to gnaw at her. She had expected him to pack up and go, to comply with her wishes, but instead, he seemed to be digging in his heels. Her mind spun with confusion. What was he planning? Greg stood at the front door, staring out into the yard, his hands stuffed in his pockets. He had spent the morning trying to gather his thoughts, but the silence of the house only magnified the anger and confusion that he couldn't shake. "You can't just order me out like this," he muttered under his breath. The more he replayed their conversation in his head, the more his resolve hardened. He was done being pushed around. He was done being the victim in this. He hadn't been perfect, but neither had she. His military training had taught him how to handle difficult situations, how to stay calm, stay focused, but this felt like war. He wasn't going to let her win. He had made a vow, not just to her, but to himself. And in that moment, standing at the door of his own home, he realized something. He wasn't going to leave without a fight. His eyes shifted toward the corner of the room, where he had placed the signed papers. He hadn't thrown them away, hadn't signed them in finality. The thought of walking away, of letting her win, gnawed at him. There was something else, something more important to him than the house or the papers, his dignity. He couldn't let her control him like this. She had made her move, but he wasn't going to let her get away with it. With a deep breath, he turned away from the door and walked into the living room, his mind already spinning with plans. Later that afternoon, Greg sat down at the kitchen table. His hands were shaking slightly, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He had already begun formulating a plan, something that would show Anna just how serious he was. He couldn't just leave. He wouldn't. He wasn't going to let her walk all over him. His mind flickered back to the papers, the deed to the house, the very thing that had started this mess. Anna thought that by signing them, by forcing him out, she could regain control. But what she didn't realize was that he still had a few moves left. The next steps would require patience. The next steps would require precision. He reached for his phone, his fingers scrolling through contacts until he found the number he needed. "Time to get to work," he muttered under his breath as he hit the dial button. Anna had thought she had ended things with a few simple words, but Greg wasn't the type to give up so easily. He knew what he had to do, and he would do it quietly, methodically. The silence in the room was only broken by the sound of his voice as he made his call, setting his plan in motion. The next day, Anna returned home to find a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Greg's presence was still felt, even though he wasn't physically there. It was in the way the furniture had been moved, the small things that she hadn't noticed before. Her heart rate quickened as she stepped further into the house, wondering if she had made a mistake, if she had been too hasty in her decision. But then she saw it. The papers. They were no longer on the kitchen counter. The silence now felt oppressive, like a heavy weight in her chest. She had expected him to leave, but what if he had other plans? The thought made her uneasy. She moved quickly, checking every room, her breath shallow as she tried to find him, to understand what was going on. But there was nothing. The house was eerily quiet again. It wasn't until she reached the living room that she noticed the letter sitting on the coffee table. It was addressed to her, and her stomach churned as she walked toward it. She picked it up, her hands trembling. "I'm not gone, not yet." The words were clear, bold, and final. Her eyes scanned the letter, her mind racing. Greg wasn't going anywhere, and that terrified her. The thought of him staying, plotting his next move, made her skin crawl. She had underestimated him, and now she wasn't sure what to do next. That night, Anna sat alone in the darkened living room, the weight of Greg's words lingering in the air. Not yet. It was a simple phrase, but it felt like a warning. She hadn't expected him to fight back. Not like this. She had thought that by giving him an ultimatum, she could finally regain control. But now, as the night stretched on, and the silence pressed down on her, she realized she had made a grave mistake. What had started as a desperate attempt to break free from the marriage was now spiraling out of her control. She had thought that she could push him out of her life for good, but Greg wasn't the man she thought he was. His military discipline, his precision, his strength, they were not qualities she had fully understood until now. He was playing a game, and she hadn't even realized it until it was too late. Anna's heart raced as she thought about the implications of what was coming. She had provoked him, and now there was no going back. The following morning, Greg's mind was consumed with a singular thought: revenge. Anna had thought she could end their marriage, take everything and leave him broken. But she had made a fatal mistake. She had underestimated him. Greg wasn't just a man pushed to the brink, he was a man trained to endure, to fight, and now he would make sure Anna would face the consequences of her choices. He spent the morning gathering every piece of information, every file, every document that he could use. The military had taught him the value of precision, of taking every step with deliberate care. He wasn't just fighting for the house or the belongings, he was fighting for his dignity, for his pride. He had made a vow to her, to this relationship, and now she had destroyed it. The sting of her betrayal cut deep, but it also gave him clarity. As he dug through their past, looking for the cracks in their life together, he found them. Hidden lies, unspoken truths, moments of weakness that both of them had tried to ignore. He wasn't just going to retaliate, he was going to expose every secret, every flaw. He would make sure Anna felt the weight of her decision, and he would do it in a way she wouldn't see coming. Greg had always been the one to stay in the background, but now he was stepping into the light. He was no longer the victim. He was the one in control, and Anna would have no choice but to watch as he tore down everything she had tried to build on the rubble of their marriage. As the day wore on, Greg's plan began to take shape. The first step was simple. He needed to hit Anna where it would hurt the most: her reputation. Greg knew she had been hiding things from him, things she hadn't even acknowledged. He would bring these secrets to light, using them not only to destroy the trust she had in herself, but also to destroy the image she had so carefully crafted for others. It wasn't just about the house anymore. It was about showing Anna that her cold, calculated actions had consequences. He wasn't going to let her get away with treating him as disposable. He took a deep breath, standing up and walking toward the front door. He had a plan, and nothing was going to stop him now. Outside, the light was dimming as evening approached. The house felt like a silent observer to the war he was about to wage. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number from his past, someone who could help him make the first strike. As the call connected, he couldn't help but smile. "It's time," he muttered to himself. The moment of reckoning had arrived. Anna would never see it coming. Anna had just returned from a long day at work, her mind still buzzing with thoughts of the house and Greg's unexpected defiance. She had assumed he would leave, that he would simply follow her orders and disappear, but his refusal to comply weighed heavily on her. She wasn't prepared for a fight, not in the way that it was coming. As she entered the house, her senses immediately heightened. The air was different, thick with the anticipation of something she couldn't see, but felt nonetheless. Greg had been silent, waiting, biding his time, and now Anna was going to feel the impact of her decision. She had come home to escape the uncertainty, but she was about to be dragged right back into the chaos she had tried to control. As she walked into the living room, her eyes locked on the envelope sitting on the coffee table. Her breath caught in her throat as she picked it up, noticing the familiar handwriting, Greg's. She tore it open, her fingers trembling. The first line made her freeze. "I know what you did." The words were chilling, But what followed were the secrets Greg had uncovered, hidden affairs, financial missteps, and moments of weakness that she had long buried. The room felt like it was closing in around her as the weight of the revelation sank in. She had never expected Greg to fight back like this, to strike at her in such a personal way. It wasn't just the house he was going after anymore. It was her entire world. Anna couldn't breathe. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in, as Greg's words echoed in her mind. "I know what you did." She stumbled back, her vision blurring as the weight of his message sank in. How did he find out? How had he uncovered everything? There were things she had done that she thought no one would ever discover. Things she had buried deep, hidden away from the world, from him. Now, those secrets were coming to light, and they were going to destroy her. She had underestimated Greg's resolve, his determination to not just leave, but to retaliate, to make her feel the depth of her mistakes. The house, once a symbol of their shared life, now felt like a battleground. Anna sat down, her hands shaking as she held the letter, staring at the words, the undeniable truth. There was no denying it anymore. He had exposed her. Everything she had tried to control, everything she had hidden from him, was now out in the open. She could feel the walls around her crumbling, the weight of her actions crashing down on her like a tidal wave. She had asked for this, hadn't she? She had wanted to push him out, to be free, but now the freedom felt like a prison. Greg's revenge was swift and unforgiving, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, and she glanced at it. Another message from Greg. "Your turn." The coldness in his words made her stomach turn. This was just the beginning. The days that followed were a blur of fear and anger. Anna found herself pacing around the house, constantly checking her phone, waiting for the next blow to come. Greg's attacks were subtle, but they hit harder than she had ever imagined. He was exposing her to everyone, friends, family, co-workers, making sure that every secret she had kept was now public knowledge. No one was untouched by his revenge. At first, she had tried to ignore it, to move past it, but every time she walked out of the house, the stares, the whispers followed her. Greg had turned her world upside down, and there was no escaping it. Each revelation felt like a gut punch. She tried to fight back, to regain control, but Greg was always one step ahead, always anticipating her next move. He wasn't just destroying her reputation, he was dismantling everything she had built, her relationships, her career, her sense of self. Every day felt like an endless battle, one she was slowly losing. She had made a grave mistake in underestimating him. What she thought would be a simple divorce had turned into a war, one that she had no way of winning. Greg had made sure of that. Anna's world was unraveling faster than she could keep up. Each day brought a new challenge, a new revelation from Greg's calculated revenge. She could feel it, the walls closing in around her as Greg's moves grew more intense, more personal. At first, she had tried to control the situation, tried to push back against his tactics, but now, she was realizing just how far he was willing to go. She had thought she was prepared for this, but nothing had prepared her for the way Greg was systematically dismantling her life. It wasn't just the house or the papers anymore. It was everything she had worked for, the career, the relationships, the image she had so carefully crafted. Greg was stripping it all away, piece by piece. It was like he had found every crack in her armor, and was exploiting them, turning her own secrets against her. The people she once trusted were now questioning her, avoiding her, unable to look her in the eye. The betrayal wasn't just from Greg anymore. It was from everyone who had turned their backs on her, believing his version of events. "How did I get here?" she asked herself one night, her voice barely a whisper as she stared out the window at the darkened sky. There were no answers, only the overwhelming sense of loss. Greg had always been the steady, reliable one, the one she could depend on. Now, he was the force that had shattered everything. The power had shifted, and Anna felt herself falling deeper into a hole she wasn't sure she could climb out of. "I won't let him win," she muttered to herself, but even as the words left her lips, doubt crept in. Could she stop him? Or had she already lost? Greg's retaliation wasn't over yet. Anna had thought he would tire of the battle, that eventually he would walk away. But every time she tried to regain control, every time she took a step forward, Greg pushed her 2 steps back. It was as though he was playing a game, one she hadn't even realized she was a part of. He had already exposed her secrets, damaged her relationships, but now it seemed like he was getting more creative. He had started to target her work life, spreading rumors, making phone calls, contacting people she trusted. Every whisper, every anonymous message eroded her standing in the community. Her colleagues were pulling away, her clients hesitated when they spoke to her, and the phone calls were increasingly filled with questions she couldn't answer. Every attempt to explain felt futile. She tried to tell herself that it wasn't real, that Greg couldn't hurt her anymore, but the cold reality was that he had found a way to infiltrate every aspect of her life. "You can't stop me," she heard Greg say in her head, his voice cruel and confident. His words were a constant reminder that she was powerless. She had pushed him too far, made him the enemy, and now he was using every weapon at his disposal to tear her down. The loneliness was suffocating. Every corner of her life felt like it had been infected by his vengeance. Anna didn't know how to fight back anymore. She was drowning, and no one was there to pull her to safety. Anna had reached a breaking point. Every avenue she had explored for help had led to more isolation. She reached out to her friends, to people she trusted, but each conversation seemed to end with a sense of betrayal. Greg's influence was far-reaching. No one wanted to get involved. No one wanted to take sides. And who could blame them? Anna had pushed everyone away in her pursuit of control. Her phone buzzed again, a message from one of her old colleagues. "We need to talk." Her heart sank. She already knew what this was about. She had seen the whispers, felt the cold stares. Greg's whispers had reached her workplace, and now her professional life was just as broken as everything else. She tried to steady herself, to put on the mask of confidence she had always worn, but it was slipping. What now? She thought as she paced the room, her mind racing with a million thoughts. Her marriage was over. Her career was crumbling. The friends she thought she had were now ghosts, avoiding her at every turn. Anna had never felt so alone, so abandoned. She had always been the one in control, the one who made the decisions, but now the decisions were being made for her. Greg was the one in charge, and she was just a spectator to her own downfall. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She had lost. There was no coming back from this. Greg's presence still lingered, even when he wasn't physically there. Anna had stopped sleeping. She couldn't, not with the constant barrage of phone calls, messages, and the endless notifications that kept her trapped in a cycle of anxiety. It was as if Greg was always one step ahead of her, manipulating everything she touched, turning it into dust. He wasn't just targeting her reputation anymore. He was stripping away her peace of mind, her ability to function. Every time she picked up her phone, there was another message, another call from a number she didn't recognize, another email with her secrets spilled out for everyone to see. "You'll never be free of me," she thought she heard him say. The words echoed in her mind, and she felt the weight of them pressing on her chest. How had she gotten to this point? How had things spiraled so completely out of control? She thought back to the moments when she felt in charge, when she thought she could dictate her own future. Now, it felt as though Greg had taken that away from her. She had given him the power, and now he was wielding it like a weapon, leaving her defenseless. The woman who had once been confident, assured, was now a shadow of herself, constantly looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the next strike. The breaking point came quietly, in the form of an envelope that arrived at her doorstep. She opened it, her hands trembling, not knowing what to expect. Inside was a stack of documents, more than she could process in a single moment. Her name was on every page, along with details of her financial situation, her business dealings, and even private conversations she had thought were confidential. As she flipped through the pages, she could feel her world cracking open. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. This was an all-out assault on her life, her privacy, her very identity. Greg had gathered everything, every piece of ammunition he could find, and now he was using it to destroy her. She collapsed onto the couch, the papers slipping from her hands as the reality of the situation hit her like a wave. "It's over," she whispered. There was no escaping this. He had won, and she had nothing left to give. She had pushed him too far, and now she was paying the price. The tears came quietly at first, then with increasing force as she realized the full extent of her loss. It wasn't just the house or the reputation, it was everything. It was her life as she knew it, crumbling to dust before her eyes. The final blow came when Anna received the letter. It was thick, official looking, and the moment she laid eyes on it, she knew it wasn't just another piece of paperwork. Her pulse quickened as she tore it open, her mind racing with possibilities. The letter was from Greg's lawyer. The words on the page were cold, clinical. He was requesting full custody of their children. She had never imagined it would go this far. Her hands shook as she read the letter again, this time taking in every detail. The details of her financials, her work schedule, and even her past behaviors were outlined in such a way that she felt completely exposed. This is it, she thought, her mind spiraling. She had already lost the house, lost her reputation, and now Greg was going to take everything else from her, including her children. The realization hit her like a punch to the stomach. It wasn't just her marriage she was losing. It was her family. Every hope she had clung to, every bit of control she thought she had left, was slipping through her fingers. How could she fight back against someone who had meticulously planned this every step of the way? How could she win against someone who had thought of everything, seen every move before she made it? Her fingers trembled as she held the letter, unable to do anything but stare at the words. Her mind screamed for a solution, but there were none. She had nothing left. Anna's mind was a whirlwind of panic and despair. How had she let it come to this? She had never been the type to give up, but this was different. Greg's relentless pursuit had broken her down piece by piece. Each move he made was calculated and precise, while she had been reacting, always one step behind. She had tried to regain control, tried to prove she wasn't the person Greg was making her out to be, but each attempt only seemed to dig her deeper into the hole he had created. The custody battle wasn't just about her children, it was about the battle for her identity. If she lost them, if she lost this fight, she would be nothing. She had given so much of herself to this marriage, to her family, but it felt like everything she had ever known was slipping away. She had nothing left to hold on to, except the faint hope that somehow, someway, she could turn things around. But with Greg's lawyer breathing down her neck and her life in pieces, that hope seemed as distant as the stars in the sky. The thought of facing Greg in court, of confronting him with all the evidence he had against her, made her stomach turn. But there was no choice. She had to fight. She couldn't lose everything. Not like this. Greg's strategy wasn't just about winning, it was about breaking Anna, making her feel the weight of her decisions every single day. He had started calling her friends, her colleagues, digging into every aspect of her life that she had tried to keep private. He wasn't just destroying her reputation anymore, he was isolating her, making sure that when the time came she would have no one left to turn to. The calls came daily, sometimes multiple times a day, and each one left her more exposed, more vulnerable. People she had trusted were turning their backs on her, unsure of whose side they should be on. Greg had managed to turn everyone against her without lifting a finger, making her the villain in a story she no longer recognized. She tried to fight back, tried to explain herself, but every conversation ended with a cold shoulder or a terse reply. "I'm losing everything," Anna thought, the realization hitting her harder each time. She had never felt so alone, so small in the face of Greg's overwhelming power. Every attempt to regain control was met with more resistance. Every choice she made seemed to push her deeper into a corner. She had underestimated his ability to dismantle her life, and now it was too late to stop him. As the days passed, Anna realized she could no longer escape the consequences of her actions. She had pushed Greg too far, and now his revenge had become something far worse than she could have imagined. She had tried to convince herself that she was still in control, that she could turn things around, but the truth was undeniable. The pieces of her life that had once been solid were now crumbling. She had lost her friends, her career was in jeopardy, and the most important part of her life, her children, was slipping further out of reach. Greg had made sure of that. He had used everything at his disposal to tear her apart, and in the process he had shattered her sense of self. What had once been a marriage built on love and trust was now a battlefield, and there was no going back. Anna had spent so much time trying to regain control, trying to fix the mistakes she had made, but now it was too late. There was no solution, no magic fix that could make everything right again. All she had left was the devastation of knowing that she had destroyed the life she had once dreamed of. The final confrontation was inevitable. Anna stood at the doorstep of their old home, the place that once symbolized everything she had hoped for. She had made the decision to meet Greg one last time. She needed closure, even if it came at the cost of her dignity. She couldn't keep running from the life she had built, the life she had destroyed. When Greg opened the door, she saw the same coldness in his eyes, the same indifference that had been there since the moment she had asked him to leave. He didn't say a word as she walked inside, his gaze following her with a silent judgment that cut deeper than anything he could have said. This is the end, she thought, standing there in the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. Everything she had tried to avoid, everything she had feared, had come to pass. There was no escaping it now. She was no longer the person she used to be. She had nothing left to give, nothing left to lose. The house, once a symbol of warmth and love, now felt like a prison. The truth hit her harder than ever. She had lost, and Greg had won. In the weeks following the explosive confrontation, Anna found herself in a numb state, a haunting silence hanging over her every step. The walls of her house, which once stood as a symbol of safety and stability, now felt oppressive and suffocating. The ringing silence was broken only by the occasional sound of her phone, a constant reminder that the battle wasn't over, that Greg's influence still loomed over her every action. She hadn't seen him in weeks, but his presence lingered like a shadow in the corners of her life. Despite the outward calmness, a growing sense of dread had taken root deep within her. The custody battle was still ongoing, and every attempt she made to settle things peacefully was met with more resistance, more pressure. Greg wasn't giving up. Each day felt like she was losing another piece of herself, another part of her life slipping away. She had tried everything, reaching out to friends, attempting to get back into her career, but each time, Greg's tactics seemed to outsmart her. The weight of it all was crushing. Even the simplest tasks, picking up groceries, paying bills, making dinner, felt insurmountable. As much as she had wanted to escape, to run away from it all, she knew she couldn't. She had to face him and face what he had done to her, to everything they had once shared. The only thing left for Anna was to figure out how to survive in a world that no longer resembled the life she had known. She had no choice but to confront the aftermath of her own decisions. Days blurred together for Anna as she continued to navigate the legal proceedings, the emotional toll growing heavier with each passing moment. She had sought therapy to help cope with the stress, but the sessions only served to remind her of the damage that had been done. The overwhelming guilt she felt over the destruction of her family weighed heavily on her heart. The small moments of peace she had once enjoyed, simple conversations, laughter, connection, felt like distant memories. Greg's presence, even in his absence, kept haunting her. He was everywhere, in the way people looked at her, in the way her life seemed to collapse at every turn. She had tried to distract herself, throwing herself into work and attempting to rebuild the few relationships she had left, but the truth remained inescapable. She couldn't move forward while he was still pulling the strings of her past. There were moments when she wanted to scream, to shake off the weight of it all, but there was no one left to hear her. No one left who understood. Her calls for help had gone unanswered, and the isolation only deepened with each attempt to fix what had already been broken beyond repair. The time for fighting was over. Now, it was just about survival. As she sat alone in her apartment one evening, the quiet hum of the city outside felt like a cruel reminder of everything she had lost. She could feel the weight of her decisions, and the toll it had taken on her, settling deeper into her bones. One evening, Anna sat at her desk, papers scattered in front of her. Her phone lay beside her, silent, as if mocking her attempts to move on. She had tried to convince herself that she could rebuild, that she could find a way to rise from the ashes of her broken life, but it was harder than she had anticipated. Greg's final blow, his plan to take full custody of their children, had left her reeling. Every legal move he made seemed to have the desired effect, stripping her of the pieces of her life she once thought were secure. Her children's laughter, once the soundtrack of her world, now seemed like a distant memory. She could hear their voices in her mind, but the pain of knowing she might lose them forever was more than she could bear. She closed her eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming sense of loss. As she exhaled deeply, the weight of everything she had done, everything she had lost, seemed to settle on her chest. She had lost control, lost the ability to fight back in a world that no longer seemed to care. The phone buzzed again. Another message from her lawyer, another reminder of the battle she was still losing. She stared at the screen, her mind numb. What was the point? How much longer could she keep fighting when every step forward felt like a step backward? There was no victory left to be had. Only the slow, painful acceptance that everything she had worked for was slipping through her fingers. Anna had never felt more disconnected from the world around her. She sat in the small cafe she had always loved, the familiar hum of conversation and the clinking of coffee cups offering a strange contrast to the emptiness inside her. She had come here to escape, to find a moment of peace amidst the storm, but nothing seemed to fill the void. The world around her continued on, unaware of the chaos she was living through. People laughed, shared stories, and smiled, but Anna felt detached from it all. It was as if she was trapped in a glass bubble, watching a life she no longer belonged to. Her phone sat on the table in front of her, and once again she was reminded of the never-ending reminders of her failures. Messages, emails, and calls from the people who had once mattered to her, now nothing but reminders of a life she could no longer return to. She couldn't shake the feeling that no matter where she went, no matter what she did, the past would follow her. The weight of her guilt and shame was too heavy to ignore, and each time she tried to find solace, it slipped further out of her grasp. It was like drowning in a sea of regrets, the surface always just out of reach. What am I supposed to do now? She thought as the realization hit her. There was no way back. There was only the road ahead, and it was filled with uncertainty. Anna stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection, trying to recognize the person she had become. The woman looking back at her was a stranger, someone who had once been confident, driven, and full of hope. Now she felt hollow. The reflection before her was a reminder of the life she had lost. The girl who had dreamed of a future filled with love, success, and happiness seemed like someone from a distant past. She traced her fingers over her face, feeling the weight of every tear she had shed, every ounce of pain that had been inflicted upon her. "How did I get here?" she asked quietly, as if the mirror could offer an answer. Her life, once so vibrant, now felt like a shadow of itself, something that belonged to someone else. The tears that had threatened to come before now welled up in her eyes, spilling over as the realization hit her harder than ever. This was her life now. She had no control, no way of turning back the clock. But as the tears fell, something else stirred inside her. A tiny spark of defiance. Maybe she had lost everything, but she wasn't entirely broken. There was still a part of her that refused to give up, that refused to fade away completely. She didn't know what came next, but she knew she couldn't keep living like this. She had to move forward, even if she didn't know how. It was finally time. Anna had steeled herself for this moment, the final confrontation that had been looming over her life like a storm cloud. After everything she had been through, the lies, the betrayals, the manipulation, she had nowhere left to run. Greg had made his final move, and now she had no choice but to face him. She hadn't seen him in weeks, but his presence still haunted every corner of her life. He had taken everything from her, piece by piece, and now he was demanding one last thing: the full and complete destruction of everything she had left. As she stood outside his office building, her heart pounding in her chest, Anna could feel the weight of the past few months pressing down on her. This was the end game. She had lost her home, her children, her friends, her reputation, and now she was about to lose whatever shred of dignity she had left. The moment she had dreaded was finally here. But, as she walked inside, a surprising calm settled over her. She had been broken and rebuilt so many times in the last few weeks that she no longer recognized the person she used to be. She wasn't the woman she had been when all of this started. She was someone new, someone who had survived hell and was finally ready to stand her ground. She wasn't going to let Greg walk away unscathed. This fight was going to end with her on her feet, no matter what. Inside the sterile corporate office, Anna was greeted with cold professionalism by Greg's secretary. There was no warmth, no acknowledgement of the shared history between her and Greg. The receptionist motioned for her to sit, but Anna remained standing. This wasn't a meeting she was going to be passive in. This was a battle. Greg had made it clear through his lawyer that he wasn't going to settle for anything less than a complete victory. As Anna waited, she found herself steeling her mind for what was to come. She had known this moment would arrive eventually, but no amount of preparation had made it any easier. Every step she had taken toward this moment had been fraught with fear, anxiety, and shame. But now, in this sterile cold office, the fear began to subside. She could do this. She had to. She wasn't going to let him win. The door finally opened, and Greg stepped into the room. His expression was unreadable, his posture stiff, and for a moment, there was an uncomfortable silence between them. But Anna wasn't going to let the silence dictate her actions. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm, echoing in the cold, impersonal room. She would no longer be afraid of him. Greg's voice was cold, almost distant as he spoke. "You've made a lot of mistakes, Anna," he began, his words sharp, each one landing like a blow. "But this is where it all ends. This is where I take what's mine." He was unrelenting, and his words felt like daggers. For a moment, Anna flinched, but she quickly masked the instinctive reaction with a cool expression. She had heard these words before in different forms, but they all led to the same outcome. Greg had no intention of letting her go. This was the final attempt to strip away the last of her dignity. "I'm not going anywhere, Greg, and neither are you," Anna replied, her voice steady but filled with a quiet power she hadn't felt in months. She had lived in his shadow for too long, and now she was finally facing him on her terms. The room felt suffocating as Greg paced, his eyes narrowed in frustration. The power dynamics had shifted. Greg was no longer the figure of authority. Anna was standing up for herself, ready to take control of whatever was left of her life. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about not giving up. "You think this is over? Think again," she whispered, the finality in her tone unmistakable. Greg's face twitched with anger, but Anna wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The fight that ensued was bitter, emotional, and raw. Words flew like weapons, accusations hurled back and forth, but beneath the anger there was a mutual understanding. This was the end of everything. The years they had spent together, the lives they had built, all led to this painful moment. But despite the years of shared history, neither of them could bring themselves to acknowledge what they had once been to each other. Greg's words were venomous, aimed at cutting deep, while Anna's were sharper, cutting through his facade of control. In the end, it wasn't just the divorce that had shattered them, it was everything they had become in the process. "You took everything from me," Anna whispered, her voice breaking. She couldn't hide the hurt any longer. "I didn't take anything from you," Greg replied, his voice devoid of emotion. "You gave it away. You gave it all up." The finality in his voice was deafening. Anna didn't respond. What was there left to say? The words were hollow. He was right. She had given it all up. There was nothing left to take, and no way to fix what had been broken. The room felt smaller now, suffocating, as though the weight of their words had condensed the space around them. Anna stepped out into the cold night air, her breath misting in front of her as she walked away from the office building. The weight of everything that had transpired, the arguments, the revelations, the years of pain, was too much to carry. But she carried it anyway, step by step, knowing that she couldn't go back. Not anymore. She had come here with a purpose, to face Greg, to confront him, and whatever was left of their fractured relationship. But as she walked away from the building, she realized that the confrontation hadn't been about him. It had been about her. It had been about reclaiming her power, even if just for a moment. She wasn't the woman who had walked into that office. She was different now, wounded, yes, but stronger for it. She had faced him, and for the first time in a long while, she felt the faintest glimmer of peace. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, she felt a sense of control return to her life. She had endured. And that, in the end, was enough.